What's up, everyone? Peace be with you. Assalamu alaikum. This is Alman Nusrat and
Nihal Khan here, guys. Assalamu alaikum.
And you are listening to
Faith and Fine Print.
We were supposed to say that at the same time.
We were, but
I love how this is like literally the second time we're trying.
But I gave you notice this time, and you still failed.
But anyways, what's up?
Nothing much, man. How you been?
I'm doing all right.
Yeah. We back for episode 3.
Yeah.
We are back.
This is technically like episode, I don't even know what episode
2 technically, yeah.
For anyone who's listening, anyone who's interested, we just did like 15 minutes of this segment of this podcast and
7 minutes. 7 minutes.
Realized it wasn't working.
Yeah.
So we're back in action.
We are back. And today we have Suzy Ismail with us. For those of you that don't know her, you're about to get to know her. We had her here at the Islamic Center of Connecticut to do a program on relationships and marriage in the Muslim community. Awesome program, hour and a half. We had a wonderful Q&A and interview with the community. And we have her here now at our studio, and we're going to, talk about her. She's a communication expert in interpersonal, intercultural, and organizational issues related to marriage and family communication. She's an international speaker. She's a published author of 4 books. And there's a lot to her that, inshallah, we're going to find out about her. Originally from New Jersey, founder and director of Cornerstone, an international nonprofit which provides faith-based relational communication counseling to people. And they also have refugee integration intervention. And the coolest thing is that she's currently a doctoral candidate with a research focus on family studies and intervention strategies. So yeah, she's a current doctoral student with a research focus on family studies and intervention strategies in the field of human and social services. Where are you doing your doctoral degree at?
So it's through Walden University.
Walden, okay,
yes,
that's
so
cool.
I'm in the final stages of dissertation, inshallah.
Nice.
Couple more weeks, I am hoping.
So you're going to be Dr. Suzy Ismail.
Yes, inshallah.
Nice. The doc's in the house. But no, Suzy, like I said, is also from, originally from northern New Jersey. Their family owns Douglas Pizza. If you're in Jersey, shout out to Douglas. Shout out to Suzy. Shout out to everyone there.
Everyone that's there.
Yeah. But no, and we are here today to talk to Suzy about the idea of marriage, the idea of divorce, the idea of relationships, glamorizing relationships, how to make marriages work.
In other words, the stuff that everyone wants to talk about.
Yeah, literally. Marriage, Jinns, and the Signs of Day's Judgment, the ultimate Muslim program. Right? It'll be filled.
Try to bring it all together under one, and let's see how that works.
Exactly. So,
Sister Suzy, I want to say, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Formally. And so what's the first thing that we're going to tackle today? We're going to tackle a couple subjects that I think are really important. What is that topic?
Glamorizing relationships, glamorizing marriage. And I'll mention this thing. I think it was on the Amalia podcast that some of the sisters were talking about how, when they take pictures of themselves and put it on Instagram, they only get like a couple hundred likes. But then when you take it with your spouse, it's like bam, bam, bam. Suddenly like your Instagram's blowing up with notifications, thousands of likes, lots of new followers. And I think it also has to do with the fact that Instagram is promoting that culture, right? It's like, oh, I'm so awesome. Everything in my life looks so beautiful. Look at these experiences. Look at this travel. But like I said, it's not talking about that relationships require individual building. It requires a sense of satisfaction with who you are underneath your own skin, who you are as an individual. So I think we want to talk about that. By the way, for the viewers or the listeners, I have a little bit of a sore throat. So if I go, just kind of apologize for that in advance. But let's get into it.
Thanks for that heads up.
Yeah.
I was wondering why. There you go. Nihal gets excited around the microphone. He gets really close to it sometimes, and he just starts making noises.
Yes.
That's
Alman, by the Alman is doing that right now. I did not do that.
We have video proof that it was me. But ASMR. That's in our Patreon. We'll do some ASMR.
Yeah, Alman will do that, and he'll also sing you a song.
There you go. All right. So, glamorization of relationships. What is your take, Sister Suzy Ismail?
All right. So I think, we can't deny that we live in a very visual culture right now. And so what used to be, just kind of looking around the world around you and assessing, we've heightened that. And so everything has a filter, and, every filter is designed to make something look more appealing or to draw more viewers in. The reality is that the pictures that make it to our timeline, the pictures that make it to our Snapchat, that make it to our Instagram, I don't know if anybody uses Pinterest anymore, or, all of these other social media avenues, these are not the pictures that represent our difficult moments. These are the highlights of our lives. And so we sometimes find ourselves, especially with relationships, comparing someone else's highlight reel with our day-to-day. And when it comes to marriages, when it comes to sustainability in a relationship, it's not going to be, that trip to Disney where, a husband and wife and perfect looking children are, standing modeling in front of the Disney castle. That's not going to be what makes or breaks that relationship. What really makes or breaks that relationship is going to be, the countless, conversations that have been held over breakfast that one can't even remember. It's going to be who makes the coffee for the other person. It's going to be who, tucks in the kids at night because one person is tired. That's what's going to make or break the relationship. And we don't see that in pictures. We don't see that online. And it's also going to be, how do we make up after a fight? How do we recover from an argument? If we're not seeing the argument, then a lot of times we struggle with the recovery. And I think that's a problem with the glamorization that we're seeing right now.
Yeah.
What can we say about, when we see what is depicted on social media when it comes to relationships, whether that couple is traveling or they're experiencing the world, is there something to say in regards to the fact that human beings or people in general still idealize the idea of marriage or the idea of having a partner, like that they still look up to that idea, like the ideal life is one where you have a partner? Do you think that stands, or do you think that's changing, that people are starting to feel like they can live without a partner, that it's not necessary? And especially from a female perspective, I'm curious to hear, how people feel about that, right? Because we have a lot of women who are divorced in our communities and women who, for the first time, maybe finding their ways, actualize who they are, maybe starting up their own businesses and kind of living their life for themselves for the first time, who may not feel like they need a partner. I mean, what can we say about relationships and how Muslims are dealing with them in general?
Yeah. I think human beings, by our nature, the way Allah Azza wa Jal has created us, is we are created to be social beings. That whole saying, no man is an island, no woman is an island either. We can't really exist within a silo. We can't exist simply by ourselves. Yes, there's a lot of push towards this idea of individualism, this idea of, I often talk, when I talk to the youth, I talk about how, we've got iPhones and iPads and iTunes for a reason, because there is this socialization and this movement towards I. But it's an I that's really breaking people down. And we are starting to see it more in the increased incidences of anxiety, of depression, of various mental health ailments that are although, again, we're not going to discount the chemical imbalance or the psychological elements of it, but there is a social aspect to it. And that's kind of the field that I study, that what happens when there is a breakdown in communication or a lack of communication. And what we're seeing is a lot of lonely people. So yes, we may put up a front sometimes that says, I don't really need anyone in my life, but that's not how we were created. So the idea of seeking your self-actualization, the idea of finding out who you are, it doesn't have to be done alone. And I think that's a bit of a myth that we've started to perpetuate, especially among the younger generation, that I worry about.
I think there was something I read recently, right? In the United States, we're the wealthiest nation on the face of this earth, but we are also a nation which, to some degree, I remember reading about this, that we are the loneliest nation on the face of this earth, right? It was actually really interesting. I read a study some years ago where, where the highest suicide rate in the country is? You guys know?
Is it NYU? Or is that universities?
No. Like what state in the United States?
I don't know.
What do you think?
I actually don't know offhand.
Take a guess. What do you think?
On campuses, I know I hear quite often that.
What state? What state do you think?
I want to say New York, but that's just because New Yorkers are mean. So I don't know.
Alana, what do you think?
I think New York would be an interesting guess because there's so many people around.
The highest suicide rate in the country is in Alaska. And then afterwards, it comes down to Nebraska, Idaho, Montana. And guess what the lowest suicide rates in the country are?
New Jersey.
Yep, and New York.
Okay.
But if you think about it, it's about where the amount of people are, right?
Yes.
It's funny, all the New Jersey trash that gets thrown our way, we have the lowest suicide rate in the country.
Look at that. See?
Right?
On the
A
sign
reason
when
why you should go to New Jersey.
Reasons to move to New Jersey. Your mental health will actually not suffer.
But then again,
Suicide.
like Alaska's cold and Nebraska's cold, and
But it
I
was-
wonder if cold weather has to do with it too.
well,
I
New
mean,
York's
it's pretty
cold.
extreme too.
Yeah. No. Actually, you know what the reason was? It was about the per capita amount of people. So it was something like in Alaska, for like every 35, for every 100,000 people, like 35 are committing suicide or something like that. Like, and then for New Jersey, it was like for every 100,000 people, like 8 people were committing suicide.
Okay.
So it's almost 4 times or 3 times more. And it got back to, actually, there's a book by which I had mentioned to you, The Good Great Place, or The Great Good Place, by Ray Oldenburg, who talks about the concept of the third place. He talks about how loneliness and a lack of population actually has led to suicides. I remember when I was an imam in Georgia. I remember that year, man, I led 3 janazas for Muslims. There's like, at that time, like in Connecticut, there's 100,000 Muslims, right? In New York, there's 1.2 million Muslims. And then in Georgia, I was like, there's like 70,000 Muslims or something like that. From that, I lived in this really rural community in like the off areas of Marietta, Georgia. Marietta is like a suburb of Atlanta. But I lived in like the like it's not really, if I call 911, it goes to county police. I remember there were 3 janazas I led of suicides, right? And it came down to loneliness. The people are alone, right? But I think that leads into that aspect as well. That people think that, oh, I'm just going to stay alone for the rest of my life. But that's not how humans are built. That's not what our faith technically wants of us. We want, the idea is the concept of the ummah, the community.
So we established this idea of, as human beings, naturally we want to find a partner, someone to confide in, someone to live life with us, to experience with us. But, and there's spaces for that, like third spaces, we have family, but then it comes to like having a partner and, the blessing that brings, also the challenges that may bring. Can you please comment on that which is like the next thing we're going to talk about, which is that process of finding a partner. What's the proper way to go about finding a partner in this day and age where people, the reason earlier when you asked about the suicide rate and I mentioned New York, because in my logic was like, there's so many people, but people are disconnected emotionally. So that's why I said New York. But, my point is basically, how do we connect? How do we go about finding people for partners when they're just, I feel like there's such a spectrum of Muslims and their practice, their belief, how they actualize their faith in day-to-day life. And I mean, that just seems like a challenge. And so can you please comment on that?
So I think it's interesting whenever this topic comes up, there's this sense of like, how do you find a partner? Like we've almost lost like that natural, organic type of, naturally connecting with someone. And I think a big part of it is because of the disconnection, because we are so consumed with our work, with our phones, with our, Netflix shows, with our, with so much that occupies us and consumes us, that there hasn't been as many avenues for that natural kind of getting to know someone, that natural sense of, again, within those boundaries of interaction, but in a very natural way. And I think part of that struggle is we have stigmatized not just divorce as we have in the past, but we've almost stigmatized marriage as well, where there are a lot of young people who are terrified of the idea of early marriage, for example, or feel like there are these blocks almost of I can't get married unless this happens and unless that happens. And I think along with that comes this difficulty in, and I'm kind of putting it in air quotes, this finding a partner. I think when we move back towards a more natural, organic type of seeking, where it's not so much about seeking that other person, but it's more about finding out, first of all, who you are, knowing yourself, knowing what's important to you, what makes you tick, what are you looking for? What are the characteristics, the traits, what is it that you seek? The more you know yourself, the more likely that when in those natural, organic settings, you stumble upon someone who kind of fits those characteristics, the more likely that you'll be able to make that connection in a healthier way. That's not to say like sit at home and just, make dua and pray that, God sends you someone. That's not exactly a part of when we talk about tawakkul, of seeking and striving and having reliance upon God, but also doing your part. But it's more about being conscious of where are you? Being conscious of your surroundings, not getting sucked into that I culture where it's just about you, not being complacent with the idea of that's okay, I'm going to live for me, but instead seeking those connections in a more natural way.
There's a lot of people I know who, especially with sisters, we come across this issue where like they feel like they're getting older, and then there's that pressure from their family and relatives, especially like with the way things were back in India or Pakistan, like where you get married young. They feel that, to start feeling that pressure in a very serious way of like, well, what are you doing? Like, you've gone through your education, and you can't find a partner now, and also, dealing with family members or relatives who say like, well, who's going to want to marry you now? And like, the negativity that comes in. And then for a woman, I imagine feeling like she's not worthy of marriage now because she's reached a certain point, which I imagine is very difficult. I mean, I have two sisters, and then I've been raised pretty much by all women. So I kind of see these conversations floating around, and women often say to other women. And then, maybe fathers say it too, but from my experience, I feel like the father's like, it's okay, you can stay at home, whatever, right? But the women are like, what's up?
Yes.
And so how would you recommend, people to deal with that?
Yeah. So I think it's definitely a very valid point. I remember when I was growing up, again, back in the North New Jersey days, I remember there was an elderly auntie who had come up to me at one of the weddings, and she asked me how old I was. I think I was 18 at the time or something. And she said, I have to give you advice. She said, a woman is like a flower, she blossoms at 18, and after that she shrivels up and she dies.
I thought she was going to be like, oh, you're 18. I had 3 kids when I was 14 in the blood.
I think that was going to come next. Yes. But there was this sense that like, there's a certain age of like ripeness. And if you go past that age, that's the expiration date. And I don't think it's very different now. It's many years after that time, but it's still, there is this sense that there's a certain age. But what we are seeing is that we're seeing families that are encouraging, particularly their daughters, get educated, get that degree, make sure you get a job, but at the same time, marry a good person, and raise children and make sure they're perfectly clean, and they go to school and they're educated. And so we're setting up almost like these impossible standards, whereas a lot of times for our sons, we're raising them a bit differently, where our sons may not have similar constraints. And so we're looking at almost like a superwoman disorder that's being implanted in our young women from a young age. And it causes a lot of difficulty that we see even in terms of seeking that marriage partner, even in terms of going down that path. So I think it starts with our own children. Mm-hmm. It starts with how do we raise our sons and how do we raise our daughters. There was a great saying, I think it was by Gertrude Stein, the feminist, who said, you'll know the mark of like an advanced society when we start raising our daughters where we start raising our sons to be like our daughters rather than raising our daughters to be like our sons. And it took me back to, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where honestly knowing that Aisha radiallahu anha said that when he wasn't in worship or in service to his community, he was in service to his family. And I think until we start raising our sons with that same mentality of what is partnership and what does that look like in the home, as we kind of implement within our daughters, when we start doing that, we're going to start seeing more of a natural inclination for partnerships to grow, because it will be a partnership. It won't be an unequal kind of a relationship.
Yeah, and I think that also goes back to the idea of connection. I think, to be frank, as somebody who is not married, right? And you see the ways to meet people. We'll talk about that later. But
I like that question. I think we should talk about that now.
Nah, I'm good. No, but to be honest, right? And it goes back to it when you're involved in the community, right? You get a taste of what people are going through every day. And I feel like, especially in the culture where people don't go out anymore as much, and I realized with the newer generation, it's a very like phone culture, right? Everyone is on their phone all the time. Like we're all in a room, right? There's like 5 of us in this room, right? And generally speaking, you're supposed to talk to somebody in the room. But now when you go to like family gatherings, everyone's just on their phone, right? Even like sometimes like my parents, right? You go somewhere, like they just do that constantly, just on your phone. Now, this goes into something else, right? And this is kind of a risque thing to say, but we are a pornified generation. You want something, you want to buy something, oh, you just you press on something and you get it. Oh, you want a spiritual boost, you just press on something on YouTube and you get it. And now that becomes a social outlet, a sexual outlet, a spiritual outlet. It becomes an outlet for everything. And that's literally what pornography at its most primitive level is, right? And that's not to get into how like the place of pornography has destroyed so many other households and marriages, but like in the age where, oh, you look at one person real quick and you swipe left or right, you know, I know it works for some people, but it's really reducing a person to a profile in a picture, which is also the same thing which happens with sometimes like the Rishta Auntie process, right? It's like, oh, we have this picture of this girl or of this guy, right? And it's like, oh, they look good on paper, but humans are not purely rational beings. Like we're emotional. We have emotions, right? And if we don't put that into account and people don't go and meet each other, they don't go and be vulnerable with each other, you have lost the most essential aspect of human interaction. And I think that's the crisis that we're falling into.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point because I never kind of drew that connection that you said, like the generalization of that kind of, what was the term you used, pornified?
Yeah.
Was really interesting because that instant gratification, right? So we want to buy something, Amazon Prime. Right. Now they have Amazon Prime Now.
You want to listen to something?
It comes
really?
in like
What's
2 hours,
that?
right?
Really?
Yeah. So there's that, and then there's also the information.
Right.
You know, like if you don't like, you can get immediate information. And then obviously we know the whole like, you know, porn thing, but then also, which I never even thought about, was the whole spiritual outlet thing.
Yeah, you just go to YouTube. Oh, I want an Iman high. Let me go watch this video.
I've never even thought about that, but that must definitely impact the way that we are
absorbing faith,
absorb life. Like every aspect of it is pretty much, that's just crazy. Yeah. But one of the things I wanted to mention was we talked about, you know, briefly about the challenges some of the sisters in our community face. And I think, you know, being around guys and talking to guys who are looking to get married, there's something, and I wanted to hear a female's perspective on it, when, like, expectations, right? Both from the woman's perspective and the guy's perspective, like, what are we actually expecting? Is it, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a reasonable expectation. Is it realistic?
You mean like $100,000 marriage?
No, I'm talking about like guys who are in their 30s, right? Looking for a girl who's probably in her mid-20s, educated and whatever, but has no past. And is like, if anyone's watching this on video, pure, right?
He did the quotation thing.
Yeah, so
just for reference.
You know, the idea of like being so picky in regards to little things, and it's just like you have to understand.
And all the time when that guy has one hell of a past.
Yeah, and then he, you know, has, like, he can do whatever he wants, and so.
So yeah, I think, you know, definitely there's expectations that are unrealistic at times, and I think that instant gratification culture does lead into it. The idea of what you see online, we spoke a little bit about the filters, the images, the unreal pictures that you're seeing online, but we also talk quite frequently about something that's known as the Jerry Maguire syndrome. And I know this is going to kind of give away my age, but like Jerry Maguire was a movie for those who might be closer to my age. There you go, you got it. Okay,
there you go.
got it. Yes.
I'm not that young.
Yes. We have a wooden floor. I can do the slide.
So in the movie, and you know, it's funny because I'll often ask in my lectures, you know, for those who are a bit older, about this movie, I'm like, what's the famous line in it? And usually the men will respond 9 times out of 10, just as Nihal did, show me the money. The women, most of the time, will respond and say, you complete me. And that's just a whole other interesting dynamic that, you know.
Where in the movie was that said? I don't even remember.
Okay, in the movie.
Nazia's raising her hand.
Renee Zellweger is standing in front of, what was it, Tom Cruise?
Yeah.
Tom Cruise. They see each other across the room, their eyes lock, and he says to her, you complete me. And I think she says, you had me at hello, or something along those lines. But you remembered show me the money, so that says something. I don't know what it says, but it says something. Okay.
Why do I remember?
Did you watch the movie?
Yeah, but I just remember him sliding across the floor.
I don't think that was that movie. Was that
a different movie?
I don't think that was.
I don't know, man.
It was a different movie.
That was like Footloose or something.
Oh, okay, yeah. No.
That was a totally different.
If anyone knows what I'm talking about, it's totally weird. But anyway,
no one knows what Oman is talking about. Everyone is just like. It's like, Tom Cruise, Tom and Jerry. It's like
Tom Hanks.
Tom Hanks.
Anyway, so this Jerry Maguire syndrome is this idea that you are going to be with someone who completes you. And so right off the bat, you're entering into a relationship with this expectation that you're going to find the completion of yourself in this other person. If you're struggling with, I don't know, let's say you have trouble waking up for Fajr and you think, when I get married, my wife is going to wake me up or my husband is going to wake me up. I'm not happy now, but when I get married, I'm going to be happy because I'm going to find this completion of myself. And a lot of times there's almost a misunderstanding or a misconstruing of the Islamic concept, that marriage is a completion of the faith. And that a lot of times people will say, well, I'm completing my faith by getting married. But in reality, when you look at it from the Islamic perspective, it's within the marriage relationship, you're going to be required to show the most patience. It's within the marriage relationship, you're going to be required to show the most mercy. You're going to be required to show the most selflessness, characteristics that are a completion of your faith. So it's not the act of marriage, but it's what comes with it and what it makes of you. So rather than looking at a relationship, I used to put up this picture of Bella and Edward from like the Twilight movies, and now my kids are like, "That's so outdated." In my slides,
Is that
I have
like
to
the
update
werewolf
them.
and like the what?
And the vampire.
The
yes,
vampire,
yes,
yeah. So somebody said Twilight to me. They said Twilight Zone to me the other day,
me.
and that was you, yeah. And I was like, Twilight. It's like Twilight Zone.
I was like, Nahal, have you watched Twilight Zone? You're like, why do you even watch that? I was like, what do you mean? And we just had banter for like 10 minutes.
Yeah, I was like, why would you watch that? Like, why are you into like a vampire falling in love with a werewolf? Like, no, bro, that's Twilight. I'm talking about Twilight Zone. I was like, oh.
But yeah, so what were we talking about just now?
Twilight. Twilight Zone.
The
Yes.
expectations, right?
Yeah. Actually, one thing I wanted to mention, when it comes to the expectation aspect of it, I think one aspect that gets neglected constantly is, like I said, enough time for self-exploration in this process. And it's not something parents talk to their kids about. It's like, oh, you're 18, you did undergrad, okay, you got your comp sci degree, you have to get married if you're 21, 22, 23, 24 years old. But like, they haven't had a chance to become a man or a woman or realize what they like, what they don't like.
I think what's crazier is that some people see marriage as a passport to actually do that.
Or a passport to America.
Yeah.
All the types of passports, different
Green
passports.
card, baby.
Like an escape, right? So like they're especially I imagine for the sisters, they're not allowed to do anything. They're like, oh, when you get married, you can travel. When you get married, you can do this. And then they're like, okay, then I'll get married. When they're not looking for a marriage, they're just looking for freedom to know who they are.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's something that occurs as well. There's a point that I was going to mention, but I don't remember it.
So I think we were moving in the direction of self-knowledge and knowing yourself before kind of seeking that completion in someone else.
Man arafa nafsa arafa rabbah.
Yes, that is true. And I think that's that self-knowledge that you want to kind of have before. I want to say before you seek out a partner, but sometimes it's also simultaneous because a lot of times we're hearing this as well, that, well, I don't know myself enough, and so this is why I'm going to delay marriage. But sometimes there may be compatibility, there may be someone that is a good fit, and there can be a simultaneous knowing of the self, without seeking like the completion.
So as a follow-up to that, we talked about, for example, if I could term it as inappropriateness of wanting to get married so that, for example, my wife wakes me up for Fajr, that kind of thing, right? When you should kind of get a hold of that and then do what you got to do. But what if is it too much to ask or valid for someone to want to feel like they want their partner to be walking that path with them on their own terms or whatever, but someone who cares about it? Sometimes I feel like there's a difference between like, you do your thing and I do my thing, and we should be happy in that. And, well, you can do your thing and I can do my thing, but there's certain things that we got to do together. Right? Yeah. Because I feel like if one person's like practicing the faith and one person's completely not, you're just going to go in two different ways naturally. Yeah. And I'm sure that's for the reason why some marriages don't even work out.
By the way, for those listeners, the Arabic phrase I said was that whosoever knows themselves know their Lord. That's actually a saying in Arabic, but for those of you that wanted the translation.
Yeah. So just to go back to the topic that you were bringing up, I do think that there's, a big part of what we do at Cornerstone prior to even premarital counseling is compatibility counseling. And the compatibility counseling is intended to be able to see, is there a connection of worldviews? Is there a connection in terms of something that's sustainable that can be built upon in this relationship? And when we look at compatibility counseling, we follow a process that's known as value dimensions. And there are 5 different value dimensions in which we actually rank our clients on to see where they're at in terms of their perspective. And there are things such as, individualism and collectivism, the view of time, high context versus low context. A lot of it is linked to communication, but a big part of it is also linked to their view not only of the world, and when we talk about the world, not just dunya, but also deen and akhirah, and where do they stand on that? And that's not to say that the person who struggles with deen today, may not be better than the person that is committed to the deen today. Tomorrow they may be in that place. But it's about, perspective, long-term goals. It's about where you want to get to and what you want to work towards, and some basic building blocks or foundations that need to be in place for a marriage to work.
I think there's also, from the Islamic perspective, kafa'a, which was the idea of compatibility, is like a huge emphasized aspect of marriage, like wali nasabiha, wali maliha, right? So like marry a woman for 4 reasons. The Prophet advised the companions, right? Marry her for her where she comes from, like her family. Marry her for her wealth, sure. Marry her for her beauty, sure. But then the 4th thing he said is marry her for her faith, which is the greatest way for you to find compatibility. He didn't say to discount the other 3 things, right? He said to actually weigh them, so much so that he even said, he'd asked companions like, one companion was like, hey, I'm getting married. And the Prophet asked him, did you see the girl? Yes. He said, no. He goes, okay, go see her so that you're attracted to her, and vice versa for the guy and the girl. So all these aspects have been kind of forgotten, right? And I know it's like certain South Asian households, like the moment you start talking to someone for marriage, if it doesn't work out, like y'all better become enemies, or like you're not real, you're not real Muslims or something like that. But like, compatibility matters. It's a part of our faith, right? And for us to not measure compatibility, and I think parents make the mistake of measuring the compatibility of each other as parents, but not to measure the compatibility of their kids. And I think, once upon a time in certain villages and families where people knew each other for hundreds of years, it worked, sure. Enough, But this is a new place, a new time, a new era, and people need to understand that there are new standards to understand.
For sure. So we're at the 30-minute mark right now. We're going to take a quick break, and we have a message from the sponsor of this podcast, which is the Mantle.
Bob's Furniture.
And Bob's. Bob, if you're listening.
Thanks, Bob.
Thanks, Bob. All right, so we're going to take a quick break, and we will be back with Sister Suzy Ismail.
Hey listeners, wondering what the Mantle is? The Mantle is an organization based in Fairfield County, Connecticut. We are dedicated to creating sacred spaces that facilitate the understanding of Islamic spirituality. The Mantle aims to revive the prophetic tradition of understanding, compassion, and spiritual cultivation. We encourage authenticity in exchange for authenticity. Come as you are to learn Islam as it is. Find out more about the Mantle by following us online on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Mantle of Love. We hope you enjoy the rest of this episode of Faith in Fine Print.
Hey everyone, we're back after the break. We got our tea refilled.
And we're making desi chai.
Yes, and we had pizza, which Dr. Suzy Ismail, who is our guest for today, really enjoyed.
It was really good pizza.
Yeah.
But it wasn't Douglas pizza, so...
So does that mean it was better than Douglas?
So we were going to talk about marriage.
Oh, we just got an answer. We're talking about the best pizzas to have in Connecticut.
Okay.
Yeah.
So before the break, we talked a bit about finding a partner and
about finding a partner and glamorizing marriage,
yes.
and working on yourself, and how to get married and all that. And I think
knowing yourself, the importance of knowing yourself, and
the importance of knowing yourself, right? And handling your own baggage. And now we're going to talk about two things. too fun stuff. That didn't make any sense.
I was going to say
we're
something.
going to talk about too fun stuff. Yeah. No, we're going to talk about number one is if you're married, staying married, and how it's tough. Like people talk about getting married. Nobody talks about staying married, right?
Yeah.
We talk about the wedding, but not so much the marriage, right? And then the other aspect is divorce. I think one aspect that we don't talk about enough is we put all this effort and money and time into marriage, right? But we also don't talk about divorce as a allowable outlet in case things do go south. Right. And it's almost like it's like we forget that as fluid marriage was during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, divorce was also fluid. And I just remembered something. There was a really interesting narration I love mentioning. It's of a companion who the hadith is in the Jami' al-Tirmidhi, which is one of the books of hadith, in which, now check this out, right? A companion is walking down the street and he runs into the Prophet ﷺ in the street, and the Prophet asks him, like, hey, what's up? Where are you coming from? And he sees there's like yellow coloring on his like clothing of like some like festivity of a marriage at that time. And the companion goes, Ya Rasulullah, I just got married, right? And the Prophet says, congratulations, right? Like he congratulated him. Right. What's wrong with this picture according to the average Muslim scene? The Prophet didn't get invited to this companion's wedding and it wasn't a big deal, right? Now it's like, oh, they didn't invite me to their wedding. How dare they? I remember I had a friend who didn't, whose like family friend didn't get invited to their wedding. And like that guy calls, his dad and is like, what did I do to deserve this? How could you have not have called me? Like the idea is that, yeah, I will pay $75 per head to this, meal that you should invite me to because I met you once in the masjid and I didn't yell at you, right? And it's funny, I remember talking to someone about like, one of my friends who's planning his wedding, and it's like, dude, my dad's inviting like all these people he doesn't even like to the wedding, right? And he's like, I went up to my dad, and he's like, Dad, why are you doing this? He goes, son, keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. It's like, so like we have these like weird expectations, right? About who should be invited, and it creates the trauma and the drama, of why people don't want to get married anymore, because like we have to put up a show and throw a party, and that's what it becomes. It's not about the wedding. It's about who are we going to invite and the decorations. Which like if you have the time and dime to do that, go do it. But then like let's say things go south. I think divorce becomes so tough because of the monetary investment that's been put into making this marriage so like amazing.
The pressure.
Yeah, right? So as opposed to like, people go through breakups and and that's okay. And I think one thing that I always wanted to talk about are the divorces of the Prophet, peace be upon him, right? There were two women that he was married to. One was Hafsa radiallahu anha, the daughter of Umar ibn al-Khattab, who he divorced, but he only took her back because Jibreel alayhi salam basically told him to take her back, and it was for an extraneous reason. Surah Al-Tahrim, وَإِذْ أَسَرَّ النَّبِيُّ إِلَىٰ بَعْضِ أَزْوَاجِهِ حَدِيثًا, like a whole surah was revealed because of it. And then the second aspect was a woman whose name is mentioned in Bukhari as the daughter of the Juwayni, or Bint al-Jawn, who on the wedding night told the Prophet to his face, "A'udhu billahi mink," that like, I seek Allah's refuge from you, because she didn't want to be married to him, right? And then afterwards, like the Prophet simply said, "Qad u'udhti bil azim," like you've sought refuge in a great being, so go back to your family. And the commentary mentions she just didn't want to be married to him because she wanted to marry a king. And you would think like, oh, what's wrong with someone that they would not want to be married to the Prophet? But it wasn't against him, right? And it's not like the books of hadith talk bad about these people. They're just not mentioned. They're mentioned actually in a positive light to take a lesson from. But yeah, they're just not, they like, at least for this woman's case, she wasn't considered one of the mothers of the believer. Hafsa, because she got remarried to the Prophet ﷺ, like they were considered husband and wife again, but it came with its own struggles. So imagine if the Prophet, having been a divorcee, came to ask for someone's hand in marriage. Like we'd be like, oh no, I'd reject him. We're not into divorcees, right? And that's what our community is doing. It's like as if like divorcees are damaged goods, but it's not that people who are divorced are damaged goods. It's that our standards are damaged, right? That's really what it comes down to, because we're looking up to this high realistic standard, which is making zina easy, right? It's making adultery very easy, and it's making marriage through like permissible means difficult. And one of my friends put it perfectly. He's like a convert, right? And he's like, I'm a taxi driver. And every Friday night I go out and I have these like drunk women in the back of the car. And he's like, that's my fitna, that they want to do stuff with me. And I have to say like, no. And I'm a Muslim now, right? But then when I go to the Muslim community, it's like I try to put myself into the community. You know, like today we had at the masjid that one brother who's a convert brother, right? And he's like in his like 50s or 60s, like, I'm having a tough time finding someone. And our community doesn't make access available to people like that so that they can meet the right people. So there's like all these problems that come into it. But like, I think we can start with the idea of trying to stay married. Sister Suzy, there are a lot of people struggling. I know lots of people have opened up to me of different age ranges about their struggling marriages. You know, and it's actually interesting. I have a friend who went through a divorce not too long ago. And him and his wife are actually very cordial about it. They're able to work out a good deal. They have kids, and like they're able to like keep it very cordial. In which the Quran actually talks about cordial divorce, sarahan jamila, like a beautiful separation. That's how divorce is described in the Quran, and how those people who like go over the boundaries are not considered like good Muslims. But like people who are struggling, like what should they know today about their marriages that they don't know right now?
Okay, so I feel like you know, Nahel covered a lot of ground in that. I'm like taking.
This is why I try not to talk. That's why I try not to talk.
Do I stop him or do I just
you
let
can
him
stop
keep going?
You can stop. You can stop me.
Edit this video and it's going to be like Nahal's face on all of us.
Oh God!
I think that would do it justice. Yes.
I will not talk anymore.
No, I think
this is the Suzy and Oman podcast. I'm done.
No.
You bring up a lot of really good points. I just, you know, a lot of thoughts were coming to my mind as you were speaking. And so I just wanted to kind of like do it justice, the topic you were bringing. I think, you know, since you kind of started taking us down the path of divorce, I want to explore that a little bit. And then we'll kind of backtrack to the staying together. Because you're absolutely right that we have a cultural stigmatization, I believe, of divorce that is not rooted in Islam at all. And I actually thought that the narration that you were going to share, the one that came to my mind was of Mughith and Barira, who, you know, Barira was someone who was very close to the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and she was married to Mughith, who was, you know, we spoke about kafa'a briefly before, compatibility and the importance of compatibility and what you look for in a spouse. And the relationship between Mughith and Barira, there was some incompatibility there. When Barira, they were both slaves, but when Barira was freed and she had the right to essentially make a choice, she went to the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam and said that she wanted to divorce Mughith. Mughith was very much in love with Barira. Yeah. And, you know, the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, you know, he's someone that loves you. Why do you want this? You know, why wouldn't you want to stay with him? And so Barira had responded and said, you know, is this you telling me that I should stay with him? Is this a commandment from Allah? And Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam kind of distinguished between his inputs, just, you know, as a leader in the community, as an imam, and that was different from a commandment from Allah. And he said, it's a recommendation, you know. And so she said, well, I want to divorce him. And there was no haraj, there was no difficulty in that. There was an understanding that there can be incompatibility. There can be a couple who feels like the kafa'a isn't there. We see it also with Zainab and Zayd, anhum, that again, there was no haraj in the fact that Zayd and Zainab were incompatible from a status standpoint, from a wealth standpoint, from just a world view.
Yeah.
And now we've made it really, really hard. It's, you know, incompatibility doesn't seem to enter into the conversation when it comes to divorce. We talk a lot instead. You know, parents will often say, well, you know, he doesn't beat you, so why wouldn't you stay with him?
What standards?
Exactly. And, you know, we were speaking about this a little bit earlier in our talk, you know, that when we look at the verse in the Quran that describes marriage, one of the most important elements of it is, you know, لَتَسْكَنُوا إِلَيْهَا, that finding that sukoon, finding that connection in terms of tranquility. So when we lower our standards to a point of, you know, he doesn't beat you, and that's enough of a standard for marriage, then that, of course, you know, defeats what we see from an Islamic perspective, even of what the meaning of marriage is. So that kind of leads us to staying together. Because again, when we look at that verse 21 in Surah Al-Rum, and we look at the description of the marital relationship, and we understand that it's meant to bring two people together, you know, to find that sukoon, there's a follow-up, which is the how. And it's through mawadda wa rahmah, through care and mercy. And so when we talk about staying together, a lot of times, you know, to go back to our comments about expectations, it's about love, and it's about passion, it's about the color red and not missing a Valentine's Day, and, you know, and that's not at all
what day is
it's
today,
about.
by the way? It's February 14th, listeners.
It is February 14th.
Man, I gotta text
You
my
know?
wife.
And that's, we create these hallmark holidays essentially because we feel like we need to commemorate something when clearly, mawadda, rahma, care, and mercy is something that should be integral in all of those moments that we talked about before that don't make it to the Facebook feed or the Snapchat or the Instagram. So I think staying together, it's definitely care and mercy, and it's about learning how to speak the same language. And those languages of love are critical, and knowing those languages of love and how to communicate.
In your experience, what are the most common problems that arise for married Muslim couples?
So, if, again, I'll make a shameless plug here. In one of my first books that had come out, When Muslim Marriage Fails, we kind of looked at the research of what was happening. And there were 5 categories in which we saw a decline in terms of the marital relationship and the breakups. They're pretty much the same. 10 years later, we're seeing very similar trends. But the first category was some form of domestic abuse. And that's not just physical abuse, but we're talking about emotional abuse, financial abuse. We're talking about psychological abuse, all sorts of abuse that were occurring in marriages. The second area was infidelity. And again, not the traditional like running off behind the shed at work and having a physical affair, but emotional infidelity. Cheating, with someone online, video chatting, Skyping, texting, whatever it is that is happening. The third category had to do with parents, in-laws, difficulties with extended family. The fourth category had to do with financial stress, and the stress of work, time, commitments, things of that sort. And the final category is empty nesting, where a couple simply grows apart after they've raised the children because they haven't invested time in their own relationship.
Interesting.
Going back to that, the languages of love, can you talk a bit more about that and how that understanding those languages helps people stay together?
So there's a great little book by an author named Gary Chapman. It's called The 5 Languages of Love. And in it, he talks about how each of us expresses love in a different way, but that most of us tend to give love in the way that we want to be loved, not in the way that our spouse needs to be loved. And so the 5 languages are gifting, touch, time, service, and affirmation. And I'll often use the example of, we might get a couple, for example, in one of our offices where the wife may say something like, he doesn't love me. He never says you're beautiful. He never compliments my hair. He never says I love you. And the husband may say something like, I work all day, or I just vacuum the house for you. What more do you want from me? So the wife is speaking the language of affirmation, seeking words of love, and the husband is seeking the language of service. And it's not that one doesn't love the other. It's just that the way that they're communicating that love is different. We'll see it in like gifting and time. So for example, someone may say, you're always on your cell phone. You're never looking at me. You don't give me that time. And the other person may say, I just bought you, a bouquet of flowers, or I just bought you. So again, one is speaking the language of gifting, the other one of time.
So one is speaking Urdu to someone that only understands Arabic.
Yeah.
And one is speaking Chinese to someone that only understands Thai.
Yeah.
So not quite, not quite.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, my wife is, as I mentioned, she's a therapist, and she taught me about the languages of love a while back, and how important it is to know that. And I think there's like these. I think a lot of times what happens is, especially if we're practicing, or for maybe, I don't know how to categorize this group of people, but people who tend to think that knowledge that is beneficial can only come to me via like Quran and Hadith or something. Like if it's not there, then I don't really need to know it, right? But there's a bunch of information that is, if you actually think about it, it's going back to Quran and Sunnah in terms of, for example, languages of love. That is something that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he understood. He had a relationship with his spouses, and sustaining a marriage and keeping your spouse happy is a part of Islam. So learning these tools, wherever you may find them, from psychologists, from researchers, from anyone, when you find that it's beneficial and it's been proven that it's beneficial, I think it's important for couples to kind of keep an open mind when it comes to that knowledge. And feel free to chime in. I'm just thinking about that because, understanding the languages of love wasn't something that I actually reflected upon, because I didn't even know how to categorize them in all these things until my wife told me about it, and she said, this is what it is, and this is what we tend to do in the things that, that you just stated eloquently.
There's actually a saying in Arabic which says that wisdom is the lost treasure of the believer. Wherever they find it, they take it. But like, even then, like, secular knowledge as a category doesn't technically exist. Like, because when you look at mathematics, for example, right? Algebra, which is al-jabr, right? Yeah. Or al-Khwarizmi, who was one of the greatest mathematicians that was there, or Haythami, who was like an astronomer and whatnot, or scientist. All these people, the idea was to use these means to get to know God, right? So same thing with this, with communication.
And I think, what Brother Alman was mentioning, again, you look at the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he's like the epitome of one who is so empathetic that he can recognize and understand what language is needed when. I had shared this in the talk earlier, but it's one of my favorite narrations between the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Aisha radiallahu anha, when Aisha radiallahu anha narrates that she was sitting with the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam and they were eating, and she said she was on her menses, and there was a glass of water between them, and she said she took the glass and lifted it and drank from it, and when she placed it back down on the table, the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam picked it up, turned it to the exact spot that her lips had touched, and drank from that spot. And in giving that narration, we understand that, being on her menses, Aisha radiallahu anha was probably feeling unclean or feeling, a little bit icky, essentially. And here, her beloved husband, the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, without even saying anything, recognizes what it is that she needs in that moment and provides that empathy in the form of indicating non-verbally how important she is to her, and how she's not unclean, it's not an impurity, and I think it's so beautiful. And there's so many examples, whether it's with Khadija radiallahu anha or Aisha radiallahu anha or any of the mothers of the believers, of how the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam knew how to tailor his non-verbal cues as well as his verbal to connect with them.
We have about 10 minutes left. I wanted to actually ask you, you travel a lot, you've written a lot, alhamdulillah, and what is something that you can share with us, something that you find is something that's necessary for young people to understand about relationships, about emotions, about all these subjects that you do talk about, that you're educated about. I mean, what have you noticed any trends? Is there anything that that you've reflected upon that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah. So I think it's important, first of all, not to simplify marriage, that yes, marriage is a beautiful relationship, and yes, it's something that can bring immense joy, and not just in dunya but in akhirah as well. But I had talked about this previously, that in all of our offices, our cornerstone offices, we have one sign, and that sign is it's not a verse from the Quran, it's not that marriage verse from Surah Al-Rum. It's a sign that says it's just marriage. And the reason why we have that there is because a lot of times the emphasis on marriage as, a relationship that defines you. If I succeed in marriage, I've succeeded in life. If I failed at marriage, then I've failed in life. What does that even mean, failing at marriage? What does it mean, succeeding at marriage? It's just a relationship, but it's a relationship that can draw you nearer to Allah Azza wa Jal. But it can also be a relationship in which you're tested. And so you've got relationships with your parents, relationships with your neighbors, with your friends, with your colleagues, with your children. But somehow we don't put as much emphasis as we do on that marriage relationship. So I think, understanding that it's just marriage, but also not simplifying marriage to the point where we start to think it should come easy. Because nothing worthwhile in this dunya will ever come easy. Because this dunya is a place of tests, and Allah Azza wa Jal promises us we will be tested. So it's hard, marriage is hard. Just like anything that we want to really succeed, it's going to take work, and it's going to take compromise at times, and it's going to take knowing yourself. And I love, the saying that Nihal shared with us earlier, in that process of knowing Allah Azza wa Jal, knowing yourself. And in that process, also getting to know your spouse. And I think it's part of the journey.
Yeah. You're mentioning, the work that goes into it. And when I had stepped into the event today, there was a young brother who was like, it seems like, you're mentioning like this source and that source. It seems like it's like a lot of homework.
Yeah. I remember that.
It's funny because I'm like, you wait till you get married.
Yeah, man, right?
And it's like,
it's one thing to study for the driving test, another thing to drive.
Exactly. exactly. But I think that resonates with what you're saying. Like it's not this thing that
Which goes back to the glamour aspect.
Yeah.
Because we see an image, and if we really reflect on it, like we see an image, and it's either aesthetically pleasing or it's not, and then we get used to that. Just left or right? Swipe left or swipe left?
Swipe left or swipe left?
Swipe left or swipe left? No.
Now we know what your chances were before you were married.
Swipe left or swipe
right. Nope.
And if that's the vibe, then basically what's happening is people are deducing everything to simple terms of just like, this pleases me and this doesn't, and this seems like it's hard and I don't want to do it, and instant gratification. I think that's something that we've kind of touched upon in multiple ways in this episode.
It's actually really interesting. I was just thinking about, I think, Bollywood has a heck of an effect on the world, right? And I don't mean this in like just for South Asians. Like as Desis, you don't realize how Bollywood has spread like into like Arab lands, into Africa and whatnot.
Well, my sister was in Morocco and they listened to Bollywood music.
Bro, I had a Nigerian classmate, right? And then he knew my name. It was like Nihal. And then I told him it's Nihal Khan. He goes, "Oh, are you related to Shah Rukh Khan? Are you related to Salman Khan?" I was like, and then he starts asking me, he's like, "Have you seen Kuch Kuch Hota Hai? Have you seen like all these different Indian movies?" But then what was crazy, I had a Palestinian friend, and he was like, if someone says in the Palestinian dialect something like really ridiculous, they'll say film Hindi.
Yes, that's an Egyptian thing too. Yes.
Like, it's like an Indian movie. And what are they referencing? They're referencing like those crazy action scenes which defy the laws of physics of people flying, right? But then like that becomes a symbol of love, right? So and actually in the book that I'm actually writing a book, it's called the Lucknow Diaries, Being Brown in America, right? And there's one section of it that talks about like people not connecting to their culture in any way. They don't know the language, they don't know the values, they don't know the morals, but Bollywood is the one thing everyone knows. To wear nice clothes is what they know. That's the only aspect of that culture that they took, and it's the most glamorized, fetishized, fake aspect of it. And you go from that culture to the swiping culture. So from one form of fakeness to another form of fakeness. Right. So where's the realness?
Right. Wow, I think that's like where's the realness?
Yeah, where is the realness? Where are we? فَأَيْنَ تَذْهَبُونَ, right? That's what the Quran has.
And I think, the realness is it's in, picking up the socks when your spouse leaves them on the kitchen floor. The realness is in, being tired after work and knowing that, your spouse is going to clean up after the kids. The realness is in, that's where the realness exists. It's not very glamorous, it's not really exciting all the time. It's not the color red. It's really much more the color blue, more tranquility. And that's when a real relationship, I think, can be built to last.
I think that's something that I've been trying to practice is basically if I expect something or I want something.
Yeah.
But before I get into that, one of my friends asked a teacher about like advice for marriage, and then the teacher's response was, "Don't have any expectations," like in the sense that you have no idea what you're getting into until you actually live it, right?
Balloon.
And so. But in my life, something that I've tried to do, maybe this is beneficial for anyone listening, is like before even like for the guys, before like opening your mouth and saying something, like literally like think like 3 times, like it just in passing through a series of filters of like, okay, is what I'm saying true? Is it hurtful? Is it necessary? Like doing that actually helps me.
And then like also understanding for this or something like that.
Yeah, it's like a thing, right? The 3 tests of something.
There was an acronym.
There was.
Yeah.
It's like I'm like visualizing the meme. I just don't remember what the acronym was. Like,
but I found that helps, and because also helps you to understand where is my wife right now, like mentally, emotionally. Is she even prepared to have this conversation, or is it just going to go somewhere else? And you have to understand that. And someone said something beautiful to me once. They said that Adam was created in one moment, and Eve was created in another, and the fact that men and women are so different is simply because we were from 2 different moments, and moments are separate from each other, right? Yeah. It's this profound way of saying that, like, you're not getting into marriage because you're looking, like, don't go marry someone looking for yourself, because it's a completely other, it's another individual with their own life, with their own experiences. And before you go to sleep, think to yourself, as you're lying there next to your spouse, that today I lived my life. I went to work. I did all these things. I saw everything from my eyes, and then realize that the person next to you has lived a life completely different than yours, and they saw things that you didn't see, and they experienced things that you didn't experience, and appreciate that and recognize that, and then learn how you can appreciate that, basically. Before we close off, Dr. Suzy Ismail, what are some projects that you're working on, things that you would like to advocate and talk about, that are some exciting things that you're doing?
So alhamdulillah, we've seen quite a bit of growth with our organization Cornerstone. And so that's kind of like my fourth baby. That's what my children and my husband always tell me.
You're a mother of 3 kids, right?
3 plus Cornerstone, yes.
Okay, nice.
What does Cornerstone do?
So Cornerstone is our nonprofit organization where we have 5 different divisions. We have a division that focuses on marriage facilitation, on premarital education, on compatibility counseling, on helping people stay married, but also helping people that are going through difficulties. So we offer divorce discernment, blended family intervention, and that's one division. That's our marriage division. Then we have our family and youth division, which focuses on parenting. And in our youth division, which we are really have been seeing a lot of growth in, has to do with identity, relationships, and sexuality. So we do work with youth that are going through gender nonconformity issues and issues of sexuality that they struggle with. Then we've got our division that focuses on postpartum depression, addiction therapy, anger management. That's offered in Urdu, Dari, Arabic, Tamil, and a few other languages.
Amazing.
And then we've got our life changes and geriatric care division, career and college planning, and then our final division, which is our refugee intervention, where we partner with all of the 9 VOLAGs, the resettlement agencies, to provide intervention for our clients. So we've received a few grants, alhamdulillah, which has allowed us to expand some of those divisions. We're growing and coming to different states, so hopefully we'll be in a state near. We're not in Connecticut yet, but inshallah, hopefully down the road. So that's kind of on the Cornerstone end. I've got a few more books that are in the pipeline, inshallah, that should be debuting soon. And there is quite a bit of focus that my research now is taking on emotional resilience and what creates that sense of emotional resilience, particularly within a family.
That's awesome. And can you give us the name of the books that you've previously written?
Yes, so there is a children's series known as the Bff Sisters. That's a middle grade novel series. There is When Muslim Marriage Fails, Divorce Chronicles and Commentaries. There is a 9 to 5 Muslims in the Western Workplace, and there is Modern Muslim Marriage, Finding the Right Match and Making Your Marriage Succeed.
Wow. And how do our listeners or viewers engage with you online? Is there a handle, or with Cornerstone, or with any of the things that you're affiliated with?
So any questions related to Cornerstone or information you want there, you can visit our website. It's cornercounseling.com. That's one L in counseling, so the American spelling, not the British spelling. You can also email us at info@cornercounseling.com. If you want to reach me directly, it's my name, just suzy.ismail@gmail.com. You're always welcome to reach out to me, and I promise I'll do my best to answer, inshallah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Suzy Ismail. That was
great.
That was great. I'm really grateful that you could be here, and I know it's so late, we got to wrap this up. So thank you so much for listening, for watching, everyone. I don't even know if I looked at the camera this entire time.
Thank you, Ahmed and Nazia, for being our entourage.
Yes, so we have
and
Nazia
for making
Khan
the chai.
Ahmed Khan, helping us out there backstage.
To all the cons in the world.
Nihal, any closing statements?
Yeah, man. I think a lot was said, a lot to process. But if you're struggling, reach out to someone. Yeah. Like, don't struggle alone. You do not have to go through this alone. If you and your spouse are struggling, go see a therapist or go see a chaplain. If you are a victim of abuse, get help. And that's not just a victim of physical abuse. That can be emotional abuse. You do not have to suffer in silence, and do not think that you are obligated to under any Islamic or cultural reason whatsoever. You have a full right to your mental health. So make sure you work on it. And like Sister Suzy said, it's marriage takes work like anything. Anyone who's ever been in a marriage or is in a marriage, like, you got to put in the work to get into it. It's not all glamorous, but inshallah, God willing, you will find the happiness that you're looking for through those relationships.
Inshallah. And if you're looking for a place to find some companionship, to find some friends, people to connect with, and you're in Connecticut or surrounding areas, check out The Mantle. an organization dedicated to creating sacred safe spaces to facilitate and demonstrate Islamic spirituality, based here in Connecticut. Thank you so much for listening. Peace be with you. Assalamu alaikum. This has been Faith in Fine Print with Alman Nusrat and Nihal Khan.
And our guest,
Suzy Ismail.
Thanks. Assalamu alaikum.
Yes, Assalamu alaikum.